Good morning everyone. Welcome to Legacy IAS Academy. In this video, we will discuss the issue of macroeconomic stability. Do you mean by macroeconomics and what are the macroeconomic indicators? This is in news because of the upcoming budget. Okay. The first indicator is the inflation. What do you mean by inflation? Inflation is the general rise in the prices of all the commodities in the market. That is the inflation. You should also know the types of inflation. What are the different types of inflation? You have core inflation. Okay, you have core inflation. You have skewed inflation. You have hyperinflation. You have double-digit inflation. You have galloping inflation. Okay, these are the different types of inflation. And here I would also ask you to know about these different types of inflation. In your prelims examination, you might be asked a question like which of the following is a correct explanation of core inflation. Okay, it can also be asked like what do you mean by skewed inflation? Which of the following statements correctly describes skewed inflation? Okay, you will be given 4 very confusing statements, part A, B, C and D options, very confusing. You will be able to select the correct answer only if you know the definition exactly. Okay, here you need to go through and revise the types of inflation. Okay, in India we have MPC, that is Monetary Policy Committee. Here I want you to comment who is the head of MPC. Who is the chairman or the head of MPC? I want you all to comment in the comment box below. Okay, in India we have the target of 4 plus or minus 2%, 4 plus or minus 2% as the target for inflation. Plus or minus 2% in the sense the inflation can be between 2% and 6%. This is set to be an optimum level of inflation for Indian economy. This is set by Monetary Policy Committee. In India, we take CPI as the headline inflation. We call CPI as the headline inflation. Most of our policy formulations are based on the range of CPI and not the WPI. In preliminary examination, there can be a question stating that in India, we consider WPI as the headline inflation. In India, we consider CPI as the headline inflation. Okay, you need to select option statement A is correct or statement B is correct. Okay, here we call CPI as the headline inflation. Recently, WPI, that is Wholesale Price Index, was at 14.3% in November 2021 and CPI was at 3.52%. Even though this is called optimum and good for the economy, but 14.32% of WPI in November 2021 is detrimental to economy. This is called a double-digit inflation which hinders the macroeconomic indicator. So inflation is one of the basic and a most important macroeconomic indicator. The second macroeconomic indicator is the NPA, that is gross NPA. NPA stands for non-performing asset. NPA stands for non-performing assets. Okay, non-performing assets. Non-performing assets, these are those banking assets which do not give any interest back to the banks. After banks lend money to firms have to service these debt. They have to service in the form of interest. Banks will be serviced by the firms. When this payment of interest is halted, we call it as non-performing assets. Okay, these non-performing assets have been in the rise since 2013. You can see here in 2013 NPAs were 3.8%. 2014 they are 4.3%. 2016, it's 9.5%. And now we have almost 9.3 to 9.5% of our GDP is non-performing asset. Okay, and we get this data from Financial Stability Report by RBI. This is a very important data. There can also be a prelims question: who releases Financial Stability Report? It is RBI. Remember this. And the third macroeconomic indicator that we are discussing today is bond price and the bond yield. This is very important and very confusing. Pay your attention. Bond price and bond yield have a relationship, and they are one of the important macroeconomic indicators. What is the relation between bond price and bond yield? Very simple, guys. For example, there is a bond which costs 100 rupees. There is a bond which costs 100 rupees, and this is a bond price. Bond price. And this bond price ensures 10% interest. So the bond yield would be 110 rupees. Okay. Suppose if the person who is holding this bond thinks to sell it, he would obviously sell it at a lower price. He would sell it at 90 rupees. Even if he sold it at 90 rupees, a person who bought the bond would obviously get 110 rupees, because the bond price, original bond price was 100 and 10% of the interest was guaranteed. So here in the first case, the bond yield was 10 rupees, and in the second case, bond yield is 20 rupees. Bond yield is 20 rupees. See here, the bond price reduced from 100 to 90. This resulted in increase in bond yield from 10 to 20. Okay, bond price reduced and bond yield increased. So this has an inverse relationship. Bond price and bond yield have an inverse relationship between them. So this is what we can conclude from this discussion. So what is the issue of bond price and bond yield as of now? The 10-year benchmark bond yield is at 6.6%, which is said to be very, very high. 10-year benchmark bond yield is said to be 6.6%, which is very high. What happens if the bond yield is high? It is because it impacts the government borrowing. Government has to shell out more money, or it has to give more bonds in order to procure its money. So it becomes very difficult for government if the bond yields is very high. So the next indicator that we have is one of the most important, that is fiscal deficit. You need to know the formula of fiscal deficit. You need to, in detail, you need to know what are the trends in fiscal deficit. Recently, preliminary examination has been asking questions on trends, okay, growth trends, inflation trends. At the same time, you also need to have an information or the understanding about the trends of fiscal deficit. Okay, what happens if there's a high fiscal deficit? We can see this in the cycle diagram. High fiscal deficit leads to higher interest payments. Okay, high fiscal deficit is nothing but the money borrowed by the government in order to finance its expenditure. That is fiscal deficit in a basic definition. Fiscal deficit is the money borrowed by the government for its expenditure. Okay, if there is a high fiscal deficit, if government borrows more, it has to pay high interests for its borrowing. If government pays high interests, then government will have limited discretion for its expenditure. If the public expenditure is less, then there will be lack of revenue. If the public expenditure is less, there will be reduced infrastructure creation, there will be reduced private investment, there will be reduced creation of employment. All these leads to reduced revenue to government. If the government revenue is reduced, the next year it will automatically has to borrow more money. So this is called a vicious cycle vicious cycle that gets created if there is high fiscal deficit. So fiscal deficit has to be managed. In order to manage the fiscal deficit, we have FRBM Act. Okay, we have FRBM Act in the year 2003. We also have Encasing Committee. Encasing Committee which suggested few reforms to FRBM Act. So you need to know all the provisions of FRBM Act. You need to know the targets and what are the reforms that were suggested by Encasing Committee. You need to have a detailed understanding about all these topics. Okay, what is the fiscal deficit as of now? It is at 9.5% of GDP in 2021, and this is the biggest economic impact of COVID-19. Okay, this is the most biggest impact. Indian fiscal deficit increased to 9.5% of GDP. Okay, but this itself is a big problem. And what is the other big problem is that 70% of this fiscal deficit is used to finance revenue deficits. Okay, we have revenue deficits and capital. We have revenue account in our budget, and also we have capital account. Okay, you need to revise budget. You need to revise the chapter of budget in economics on these lines. Revenue expenditure and revenue receipts. We have capital expenditure and capital receipts. So 70% of our fiscal deficits are used to finance this revenue deficit, which is very, very bad. Fiscal deficits should be, or if used to finance capital expenditure, they are said to be useful. If fiscal deficit is used in order to finance revenue deficit, then it becomes detrimental to the growth of economy. So remember this. 70% of our fiscal deficit is used to finance revenue deficit, and our fiscal deficit is at 9.5% as of now. The next, as if you are closely following the share market or the stock market that we call it as, we can see just yesterday there was a very high fall of Sensex and Nifty. Okay, Sensex drops to 1500 points. Sensex dropped to 1500 points, and this resulted in the loss of massive 9.15 lakh crore rupees. Just in one day, 9.15 lakh crore rupees got loss from the stock market. Why did this happen? This happened because what we call as FII, foreign institutional investors. These foreign institutional investors pulled out massive money from Indian economy. They pulled out massive money from Indian economy. They pulled out money because USA increased the interest rates. USA resorted to what we call as fiscal consolidation. And hence increased the interest rates, because of which, in a hope to get higher returns, foreign institutional investors pulled out money from Indian stock market, which led to the loss of 9.15 lakh crore rupees. Okay, this happened also because of the third wave and the uncertainties that are related to the pandemic that is happening in India as of now. Okay, this stock market and the financial markets bubble, we call it as bubble because it can blast at any time. Financial market bubble is also one of the major macroeconomic indicator that is bothering the economy as of now. So the budget of 2022 and 23, so the budget of 2022 and 23 needs to cater to all these macroeconomic indicators that we discussed, like inflation, NPAs, fiscal deficit, and also the financial markets. If the budget caters to all these macroeconomic indicators, then we might have a very good and inclusive growth for the financial year 2022 and 23. We would have come up with these measures to cope up the after effects of COVID-19. So the government is in a dilemma whether to have a fiscal consolidation or to go for fiscal stimulus. Okay, what is fiscal consolidation and what is the difference between fiscal stimulus? How is it different from fiscal stimulus? Fiscal consolidation is a process where the government aims to reduce its fiscal deficit, that is at 9.5% as of now, and also its debt. Okay, if the government aims to reduce its fiscal deficit and its debt, we call it as fiscal consolidation measures. What is fiscal stimulus then? Fiscal stimulus means if the government prioritizes growth, over increase in fiscal deficit and increase in the debt, then we call those as fiscal stimulus measures. Okay, we have discussed the advantages of fiscal consolidation and the disadvantages of fiscal stimulus in the earlier videos. So I request you to look at that video in order to have a better understanding of the differences between the two. So if the government resorts to fiscal consolidation, and government should also bat for inclusive growth and the expenditure in health and education and also creation of employment. If these things are taken care of in the upcoming budget of 2022 and 23, then for sure India will achieve $5 trillion economy that our Prime Minister is hoping for, the $5 trillion economy in near future. Okay, let's look at a question now. What are macroeconomic indicators? We have discussed the importance of macroeconomic indicators, and we have also discussed the different types of macroeconomic indicators. List the macroeconomic indicators. Okay, I hope you will be able to answer this question. Bring out the differences between fiscal consolidation and fiscal stimulus. Okay, bring out the differences between fiscal consolidation and fiscal stimulus. This also we have discussed, and this question is for 15 marks. You can, as I always tell you, divide the question into parts. In this question we have 3 parts. First one is what are macroeconomic indicators, where you define what are macroeconomic indicators, and in the second part you list down the different macroeconomic indicators, and at the same time you differentiate between fiscal consolidation and fiscal stimulus. Okay, and while you conclude, how do you conclude? Many students will have difficulty in how to conclude an answer. See, when you're concluding this particular answer, you can say that the government should prioritize sustainable, inclusive and faster economic growth in order to achieve $5 trillion economy. Simple $5 trillion economy, simple conclusion will do good. Okay, thanks a lot. Watch and subscribe Legacy IAS Academy for more such enriching content. Thank you.